minorities.
People of color.
Diverse voices.
Just a few of the words and phrases for those of us who don't identify as white. Let's picture this like a sports team. You've got the veterans, you've got the fresh-faced rookie, and last season's MVP, a player who's less and less sure about where they stand. Is it time to say R.I.P. to P.O.C? And if so, is BIPOC, BIPOC, the new kid on the block? P.O.C. has things going for it. It's humanizing.
Because it invokes an image of us, unlike the terms non-white or minority, where whiteness is front and center.
P.O.C. is also versatile. You've got your leaders of color, directors of color, bakers of color, even whaling captains of color. And P.O.C. is a big tent word. All the identities that have been racialized and denied membership into the whites only club, they can kick it under that tent together. But this big tentness is where the problems start. One, the edges of the tent are really just the US. Globally, white people are the minorities. Two, people can use P.O.C. pretty indiscriminately.
White folks just use it to avoid saying the word black.
I think that when we say people of color as a catch-all, we're sort of taking away from the fact that maybe this particular issue really affects Black people or significantly affects Native people, and so on and so forth.
Three, it's just so vague. There's a reason why very few people lead with, "Hi, I'm Shireen Marisol Meraji and I'm a person of color." No, I would say I'm Shireen Marisol Meraji and I'm Puerto Rican and Iranian. But there is a flip side to that loss of uniqueness too.
Part of the power of any group that influences our social or political behavior has to do with the fact that it homogenizes all of those differences. And that allows an individual member to essentially say, I am part of this we, right? By simplifying things, you're better able to see yourself reflected in the larger group.
And of course, this simplification happens with all group labels, not just P.O.C. Black, Asian, Latinx, Native American, etc. They describe a generalized experience that flattens individual differences and our different experiences with racism. This is what BIPOC, or BIPOC, is trying to address.
Indigenous people are always erased, like often erased. Like people don't even think we exist anymore. So I think saying Indigenous requires you to see Indigenous people. And saying Black requires you to hold white supremacy accountable for putting Black folks on the bottom, you know. We have to be honest that there is a hierarchy, like who is more proximate to whiteness and who isn't.
That said, BIPOC is creating some confusion.
I have no idea how to say BIPOC. I've heard it pronounced BIPOC, like Tupac, but I woke up one day and the whole internet was using it.
And more significant than pronunciation is actual discrimination. Latinx people who may not identify as Black or Native have certainly endured discrimination. So should it be BIPOC? We can point to the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II or the Chinese Exclusion Act, not to mention a surge in hate crimes since the start of COVID. So should it be BIPOC? Maybe BLIA? I took this question to someone who has experience building coalitions, an organizer.
My job is to figure out how to get people to jump through the first hoop, which is talking about what we have in common. It's worth us experimenting with this terminology if there's the possibility of bringing us closer together for the purposes of building power.
Which brings us back to Efren and his experiment. Essentially, he wanted to know if those of us who identify with a big tent term like P.O.C., if we're more willing to look out for each other. And here's what he found.
So in the experiment, I had 3 samples: Black adults, Asian adults, Latino adults. And within each sample, they were all randomly assigned to one of 2 conditions. In both conditions, they all read the same census information talking about the growth demographically of people of color.
And then for one condition, he suggested they all shared a POC experience.
Sort of a message that said, look, there's diversity in these communities, but they all have one thing in common, and that's that they share the short end of the stick relative to whites.
And for the second condition, he emphasized the uniqueness of each individual group.
At the end of the day, you really can't compare the Black experience and the legacies of slavery with the Latino and Asian experience and immigration.
Efren had both groups answer a series of questions about political issues that are generally seen as unique to different groups, like support for Black Lives Matter or DACA. And what he found?
When we affirm the parallel experiences that unify the group, you see that higher levels of identifying as a person of color lead you to be more supportive of Black Lives Matter, more supportive of DACA, irrespective of whether you're Black or Latino.
So this is the real superpower of P.O.C. or BIPOC, BIPOC, if that's what we decide to use. They can both describe and create a reality. They can encourage empathy across racial groups, and they can also build political power. Third World Coalition, people of color, BIPOC, the words and phrases are gonna change. But coming together in a society built to keep us apart, that is no easy feat. We did a much deeper dive on this on the Code Switch podcast. You can find us at npr.org/codeswitch or wherever you get your podcasts.